The execution of King Louis XVI. King Louis XVI was the last king of France before the French Revolution. He was born on the 23rd of August 1754 in the Palace of Bastille, France. He ascended to the throne in 1774 at the age of 20, after the death of his grandfather, Louis XV. Louis XVI was married to Marie Antoinette, who was the daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor, Francis I, and Maria Theresa of Austria. During his reign, Louis XVI faced a variety of challenges, including financial difficulties, social unrest, and political instability. He tried to implement various reforms to address these issues, but his efforts were largely unsuccessful. His reign is often associated with the decline of the French monarchy and the events that led to the French Revolution. In 1789, the French Revolution began with the storming of the Bastille, a prison in Paris. Louis initially tried to resist the revolution, but eventually he and his family were forced to flee the palace and seek refuge in the Tuileries Palace in Paris. In 1792, the monarchy was abolished and Louis XVI was put on trial for high treason. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by guillotine on the 21st of January 1793. His execution marked the end of the Bourbon monarchy in France. Louis XVI's relationship with his wife Marie Antoinette was complex and had a significant impact on his reign. They were married in 1770 when Louis was 15 and Marie Antoinette was just 14. The marriage was arranged as part of a political alliance between France and Austria. Initially, the couple's relationship was strained and they struggled to conceive a child for several years. However, they eventually became closer and had 4 children together. Marie Antoinette was known for her extravagant spending and lavish lifestyle, which caused significant public criticism and contributed to the monarchy's unpopularity. Louis often supported his wife's spending habits, which further eroded public trust in the monarchy. Despite their close relationship, he was unable to protect his wife from the criticism and hostility of the French people during the Revolution. Marie Antoinette was accused of various crimes, including treason and incest, and was ultimately executed by guillotine in October 1793, just a few months after her husband. Overall, while Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette had a close relationship, their inability to address the economic and social issues facing France, coupled with their extravagant lifestyle, contributed to the downfall of the monarchy and ultimately led to their tragic end. Louis XVI was imprisoned twice during the French Revolution. The first time was in 1791, when he attempted to flee France with his family. They were captured in a small town in northeastern France and returned to Paris. After this incident, Louis was placed under house arrest in the Tuileries Palace in Paris. The second time that he was imprisoned was in 1792, after the monarchy was abolished and the National Convention was established. He was accused of treason and other crimes against the French people, and in August of 1792, he and his family were imprisoned in the Temple, a former fortress in Paris. He was separated from his family and placed in a small room with few amenities. He was allowed to exercise in a small courtyard for 1 hour per day and was visited by his family and a few loyal supporters. Louis's imprisonment was a symbol of the revolution's victory over the monarchy, and his condition deteriorated over time. He was subjected to harsh treatment and deprived of basic comforts, but despite this, he remained dignified and composed during his imprisonment. In January 1793, Louis was put on trial by the National Convention and found guilty of high treason. He was sentenced to death by guillotine and executed on the 21st of January 1793 in the Place de la Révolution in Paris. His execution. Louis XVI's execution by guillotine was a significant event in the French Revolution. He was executed in the Place de la Révolution in Paris, which had been renamed from Place Louis XV after the monarchy was abolished. Louis's execution was the culmination of a series of events that had led to the downfall of the Bourbon monarchy in France. He had been imprisoned since August 1792, and in January 1793 he was put on trial by the National Convention, which had been established after the monarchy had been abolished. He was found guilty of high treason and sentenced to death by a narrow margin of votes. On the morning, Louis was taken to the guillotine in a procession through the streets of Paris. He was dressed in plain clothes and had his hands tied behind his back. He remained composed and dignified throughout the procession and during his final moments. At approximately 10:22 a.m., Louis was executed by guillotine in front of a large crowd of onlookers. His execution was met with mixed reactions, with some celebrating the end of the monarchy, while others were mourning the loss of their king. His execution marked the end of the Bourbon monarchy in France and the beginning of a new era of French history. The French Revolution continued for several years after his death, ultimately leading to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the establishment of the First French Empire. When he arrived at the guillotine, Louis climbed the steps to the platform and addressed the executioner, saying, "I die innocent of all the crimes laid to my charge. I pardon those whose occasioned my death, and I pray to God that the blood you are about to shed may never be visited on France." Louis's head was then placed on the block and the guillotine was activated, severing his head from his body. His body was then taken away for burial in an unmarked grave. After he was executed, his body was initially buried in the Madeleine Cemetery in Paris in an unmarked grave. However, in 1815, after the fall of Napoleon Bonaparte, Louis XVI's remains were exhumed and moved to the Bastille of Saint Denis, where most of the French kings and queens were buried. Louis's body was placed in a crypt at the Bastille, along with the remains of his wife Marie Antoinette, who had also been executed during the French Revolution. The crypt became a pilgrimage site for royalists and other sympathisers who visited to pay their respects to the fallen monarchs. In 1816, a monument was erected at the site of Louis XVI's execution in the Place de la Révolution in Paris, which had been renamed Place de la Concorde. The monument, which still stands today, is a statue of a winged figure representing liberty, holding an olive branch, a symbol of authority. The statue stands on a pedestal that bears an inscription that reads, "To the French people from the National Assembly, in memory of the victims of 1792 and 1793. Today, Louis XVI's legacy is still debated in France, with some viewing him as a well-intentioned but weak monarch who was unable to address the social and economic problems facing France, while others view him as a victim of circumstance who was unable to overcome the forces of the revolution. Regardless of one's perspective, Louis XVI's execution was a significant event in French history and marked the end of the Bourbon monarchy in France. Please continue to support my channel by subscribing. Please comment, like and subscribe if you wish for more stories, and leave your suggestions below and I will endeavour to cover them.